we're going to talk about the European Union. Now, the outgoing Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, is a committed ally of Ukraine and a fierce critic of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, Rutte is set to become NATO's next Secretary General.
That's right, and the former PM's path to NATO became clear when Romanian President Klaus Iohannis announced that he was withdrawing his bid for the leadership. Now, joining us to talk about NATO's next leader is Louis Wierenga, a lecturer in international relations, Baltic Defense College. Welcome to the program. Good to have you.
For having me. Always good to be back.
Now, of course, when we mentioned, this is not just the European Union, this is a NATO issue, it's all combined. I mean, Europe is doing more defense now than it was ever in the past. But let's look at what we have so far. Very much now, it seems very clear-cut. We need unanimity for the next Secretary General. It seems to be that Rutte has it in the bag. So what can we expect now of this kind of role of Rutte? What are going to be some of his biggest challenges?
Well, it's an interesting question because he is succeeding Secretary Stoltenberg, who did an exceptional job. Secretary Stoltenberg has his term as SecGen extended several times, and that was unplanned. And so now he's transitioning. I would say we're post-pandemic by a couple of years, that's for sure. Politically, in some member states, that's still playing out in terms of different levels of populism and backlash against the so-called elites. But Mark Rutte's biggest challenge is going to be the ongoing war on European soil, albeit Ukraine not an EU member. And he's coming, I think it's good that the allies have all given their go-ahead prior to the Washington summit. So that's a really big signal of strength for the unanimity and cohesion of NATO pre-Washington summit. So I think that's a good thing for NATO allies that we can all say that we've agreed upon this prior to the summit. So Mark Rutte is coming from the Netherlands, and he has, as you said, been a staunch supporter of Ukraine, and he has gotten his country of the Netherlands to agree to the 2% threshold going forward, as many other NATO members who have not met that threshold have agreed to do going forward. So I think this is a good thing for NATO. It symbolizes the allies are on the same page, we're ready to work together, and we're ready to tackle the many multifaceted challenges that are coming forward at a quite fast pace, not only in the future, but also in the present.
Mm-hmm. But I want to ask you about, before we continue our conversation on Mark Rutte, it wasn't an easy path to get where he is right now. He had some obstacles on his way. But I want to ask you about Romanian President Klaus Iohannis, because we read that he revealed he was withdrawing his bid for the leadership. Now, how come he wasn't taken seriously, do you think? Is it too bad that we actually don't have a Secretary General that is going to represent this part of the world?
Well, I don't think that it wasn't that he was taken seriously. I mean, he was taken very seriously. He co-chaired with President Andrzej Duda the Bucharest 9 summit very recently, along with the Latvian President Edgars Rinkēvičs and the current SecGen Stoltenberg. So I think that he was taken seriously, but I think that what this signals is that it's a very politically sensitive issue who the Secretary General is. And when you have a position like that, there's always going to be several people who are very qualified, who would make very good candidates. There were other people who, Kaja Kallas, the Prime Minister of Estonia, was one of the people whose name was in the hat. Ben Wallace, the former Defense Secretary of the United Kingdom, his name was also rumored a while back. And so I think it came down to first Rutte, Iohannis, and then Kaja Kallas, and then Mark Rutte and Klaus Iohannis. And I think Klaus Iohannis withdrew. It was just a signal that the allies were positioning for Mark Rutte because that was the candidate that you could get the most members to sign off on. Because the one thing about NATO is it's always unanimous. We always have to be lockstep with each other. And Mark Rutte went to Hungary to talk to Orbán Viktor very recently, and they kind of had an agreement about Hungary's future when it comes to Ukraine within NATO. So I think that it was one of those politically sensitive issues that we were able to avert sooner rather than later in a more positive way than I think a lot of people were expecting that to happen. I mean, there are some people that were
But Louis,
thinking
let me
this might not
interrupt
be
you there,
resolved.
and I want to also
Sure,
jump
of course.
on what Anya has just said very much about, I think, a disappointment generally. I mean, we very much have been talking about, you mentioned Bucharest 9, just there actually last week about this, and that's the eastern flank. That's where it matters right now. I think, pardon me the numbers here, but I think most Secretary Generals have come from the Benelux countries, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg. So it isn't really, it's a very safe choice, but at the same time, it also, one of the things is corralling up more money. Certain allies are not spending that much. Italy is still falling below that. Canada is still falling below that. Spain is still falling below that. And we're looking at, I think, Mr. Rutte himself during his premiership of, I think, 14 years, he couldn't get that 2% on the Dutch. So what, I mean, doesn't this sort of send a very weak signal of like, well, what kind of Secretary General do we have here? I mean, it's in terms of geography, it's a simple pick, it's a safe pick. What does that say about the mechanism of NATO potentially here?
Well, certainly that's a good point, and it's a point that needs to be raised. And I can very much sympathize living in the Baltic states, also Poland for that matter, saying that, hey, where are we in the discussion? Why is one of our people not the Secretary General? And I think that if not this pick, then the next pick, it should be geographically spread out. That is for certain. And you are right to raise that issue because the eastern flank, especially the northeastern flank, is definitely the center of gravity geographically speaking for the alliance. That's where the hot issues are happening right now with hybrid attacks, with gray zone incursions, with potential vulnerabilities. And you are right to raise the issue of defense spending. I think that's something that if after the Washington summit in a couple of years going forward, allies don't meet that as a floor. I mean, the floor and the ceiling is not just a platitude. It's something that needs to be taken seriously going forward because realistically speaking, it should be between 4 and 6%.
Right.
If we want to really make sure that we're at a competitive advantage and some, because as a military strategist, I think we always have to be not 1 or 2 steps, but leaps.
All right, there's more things we want to ask you there. I have to interrupt you, unfortunately,
sure,
but I think with NATO, we're going to have our hands full. We very much, I think, have been covering this for long, and we'll continue to cover it. We'll have to close it on this discussion, unfortunately.
And it's very interesting that 4 weeks after Rutte starts his position as a NATO Secretary General, Americans will go and vote, and they may vote for Donald Trump, and that's another challenge that Rutte might face. Sir, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.